On today's episode of The Independent, Pete and I catch up with Joshua Perry, who will be on the pregame and halftime show for NBC. Joshua shares great insight about his time playing for Ohio State, getting to know Marcus Freeman while in Columbus, and previews this week's big clash between the Buckeyes and the Irish.
Welcome to the latest episode of The Independent. I'm Pete Sampson, joined by my co-host Matt Fortuna in Chicago. As a reminder, if you're listening to the podcast, Apple, Spotify, subscribe, give us a 5-star review. It helps get the word out of The Independent to Notre Dame fans and potential new listeners, or you can check us out on YouTube. Subscribe. That also helps with the show. And Matt, I don't think we'll be struggling for viewers or listeners this week. Particularly on Saturday night. We've also got a live show coming on Thursday in Chicago that we're going to do for a limited sold-out audience, but that will be another podcast later in the week. And I mean, the week demands it, right? Like, this is the big. I've been on some shows where people ask the question, "This is the biggest Notre Dame home game since what?" And like, I kind of keep getting drawn back to 2005 USC.
Yeah, the demand is high. People are saying, Pete, tickets for our live show are on the secondary market for even more than tickets to the actual football game on Saturday night. So we're looking forward to that. A reminder for our listeners, we are doing a live recording downtown Chicago at ESQ. Tickets for that have sold out through the Notre Dame Club of Chicago, but there is a networking only ticket hour-long session afterward. Those are still available as well. So go to the Notre Dame Club of Chicago website for more information on that. Pete and I are excited about that. We are more excited for the game on Saturday night. We have Josh Perry on this week's show. You'll see him and hear him on the NBC broadcast. And I've got to know Joshua very well through our mutual connections at Stadium, where we both do some TV shows. And just one of the sharper minds in college football media right now. And a guy kind of like Brady Quinn, right, who's got a lot of name recognition with people who remember seeing him play not that long a time ago, a guy who won a national championship and played in the NFL. And, he really became a force last year on the Big Ten Network going around the conference. And this year, I'm happy to see him get the platform he's had on NBC. I think folks will really enjoy this discussion with him because he knows Notre Dame better than I think a lot of people at Notre Dame know Notre Dame, because he knows damn near that whole staff from their time together in Columbus.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation sort of about, Marcus and how he fits in with Ohio State and just sort of the perspectives there. On the ground in South Bend, Marcus Freeman and Sam Hartman had press conferences today, one after the other. And then Notre Dame showed off a little bit of this sort of, how would I describe it? Sort of like a light up bracelet that they will be putting on every seat in the stadium that then will be synced up by the section. So they'll kind of have a little bit of a rock concert feel as they control when those lights go off. I'm sure that the Ohio State sections will not cooperate with said festivities. But, Freeman is, he's confident in his quarterback. And that is, there was a Ohio State writer, Doug Lee Maurice, was in there today and asking the questions about, like, how much difference does experience make at quarterback? And I think it is the difference between last year and this year for Notre Dame, both in terms of what Notre Dame gained and what Ohio State lost. So as much as Ohio State might have a more talented roster, as long as you've got a healthy Sam Hartman out there, that to me is the reason Notre Dame should have confidence heading towards Saturday.
Yeah, it was nice to see Doug Lee Maurice there. He covered Marcus as a player and knew him very well, dating back 15 plus years right now. And Marcus obviously recognized him as well. Nice to see Sam Hartman get that, quote unquote podium treatment, which if they win this week, they're probably, I would do every single week, because if they beat Ohio State, he will be on that top 3 Heisman front runner list at the bare minimum. I got an email from BetMGM today that said he's the 3rd biggest liability they have right now for Heisman because of, the preseason odds versus what he's been able to do so far. And again, you talk about Heisman moments, doesn't get much bigger, at least in September, than getting Ohio State under the lights and getting the chance to get a marquee win. Now I talked about this on the the post-game Central Michigan show on Saturday. I've been plugging along this week for a story in the Inside Zone, just talking to coaches who have faced both programs about, what to really expect Saturday. And it's early. I'm not complete with all my calls, and I'm not giving you my personal opinion yet, but some of the insight so far has been like, yeah, Notre Dame probably should win this one, right? Like not to like go over the top with it. They are technically a home underdog in this game, but to your point, Pete, quarterback experience is everything. And maybe Kyle McCord gets there. Maybe he gets there Saturday night. I don't know. But Notre Dame is there right now with Sam Hartman. Now, there have been a lot of high remarks about that Ohio State defense, and they're certainly going to show Sam a lot of stuff he has not seen at all through the level of competition Notre Dame has faced through 4 games this season. But it's definitely interesting. And, the headline news today, if you're a Notre Dame fan, Tyler Buchner's not Alabama's starting quarterback. Surprise, surprise. After last week, Jalen Milrose will be their guy moving forward. We talked about how much former Notre Dame quarterbacks struggled elsewhere this past Saturday. And you're seeing the difference right now between what they had and what they have right now, and just how that confidence kind of infects everyone around the program and makes this even more of an event than I think it already been. I mean, Notre Dame and Ohio State, I don't care if they're both 2-2. That's a game that's going to sell out and be a primetime audience. When they're playing the way they're playing right now, it really, I think, skyrockets this game into another stratosphere of hype that, like you said, I don't think this place will have ever seen before, since the Bush Push game.
Yeah, it's kind of into the game itself. Some of the, aside from quarterback play, Marcus Freeman lauded Ohio State's defensive line as being sort of deep and very talented, and I do think that's one of the spots, if not the spot on the field, where Notre Dame, they at least need to play that to a draw on Saturday. Like I think that Ohio State's defensive line is better than Notre Dame's offensive line. And last year going into the game, I felt that Notre Dame's defensive line was going to be able to move a little bit of Ohio State's offensive line. It didn't work out that way. So, to win in the trenches in a way that they didn't last year definitively, I think is very significant. In the interview, Josh will talk a little bit about his take on Ohio State's offensive line. But I think Notre Dame's offensive line, this is a big moment for them, because not that they've played poorly, and, it's not, I wouldn't say that they've struggled, but they haven't hit sort of their optimum level yet. And I do think, like, for all the quarterback advantages Notre Dame may have, and the ability for Sam Hartman to throw the deep ball, especially when he can just sit back there and hang out. There were plays when you go back and watch the Central Michigan game where he missed a deep shot or two because there was a guy in his face. That play to Tobias doesn't get made if Jack Sawyer or JT, number 44, fly off the edge around Blake Fisher and drill Hartman in the back. So the ability to sort of keep Hartman clean will be paramount, but I think that's kind of one of the matchups within the game that I'm most interested to see is, can Notre Dame's offensive line take a step forward that I think they have in them. I don't think they need to have an out-of-body experience, but I'm not sure they've played great for 4 quarters yet.
Yeah, I'm with you there, and I think there's, we're the media, the fans, we all can say and hype this game up all we want. I think if you're Notre Dame, you're mature enough, one, to realize, like, one, we're confident enough and believe in ourselves enough to win this game, but two, like, Ohio State historically has been at their best when they're kind of counted out, and I don't think anyone's counting them out in this game. I mean, they are the road favorite, right, but there's not an air of invincibility around them the way there was going into this game last year. Whether it was the rematch with Clemson a few years ago when they punched back and for all we know, ended the Clemson dynasty as we know it. Whether it was a Georgia game last year, which, again, we all completely forgot about Ohio State after Michigan smoked them for the 2nd straight year. And you look back at it, and this probably still hurts Buckeye fans this day. They're a missed field goal away from probably winning the national championship last year, because we saw what Georgia did to TCU, a week later in the national title game, and we saw what Ohio State almost did to Georgia. So I think there's, there would be danger in not overlooking Ohio State, but in being overconfident going into this game, because that defense is like none other that Notre Dame has faced. And we saw it last year. I thought even going into last year's game, as much as that played out the way we thought it would, as far as like hang on for dear life, there was, and Joshua talks about this a little bit in reference to Ohio State's opener this year against Indiana. Last year, Ohio State's opener, through 3 quarters, you're thinking, what the hell did Ohio State do all offseason? Like, this was a put up or shut up year after losing to Michigan, and they've only put whatever it was, 7 points on the board, 14 points on the board through 3 quarters. And you saw that Ohio State team learn to win a different way. I mean, they were the tougher, more physical team on the field against Notre Dame last year, which I wasn't exactly confident would be the case going in, but it certainly was the case afterward. I mean, they got after Notre Dame's offensive line. They completely wore Notre Dame down in the fourth. Once they took the lead and got the ball back, you knew they were not giving that ball up. Mayan Williams was able to run for 4 or 5 yards at a time, and that was that. So, you got to be prepared for everything when you play a team as deep and as talented as Ohio State. The one thing I am sure of that Notre Dame will not overlook is the Duke game, because that just got announced today as a ABC primetime game, presumably with Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit. I see how excited you are about that.
I didn't know this.
Oh, you didn't? Okay. Yeah. You seem very excited. And we'll see what the week after is Louisville. I mean, they have USC the week after that, which is primetime. Can they make it 4 in a row? Maybe.
No, I hope not.
Well, here's the Duke was hoping they would get game day for maybe the first time ever. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that would be a first.
Maybe they will get it. If Notre Dame beats Ohio State, they might. But that is definitely like NC State was more overlookable because it was a noon game. When you have Kirk and Fowler and Holly and, the ABC lights there, like there's no overlooking that game. You can't not get up for that game. So I think that, in a weird way, works in Notre Dame's favor. And it's Notre Dame. They're used to playing on these kinds of stages and playing night games again home very late at night, as are some of their beat writers, Pete Sampson.
Yeah. And podcasters.
One of the best parts of starting the Independent podcast was a chance to pick the brands we wanted to work with, and Roback was at the top of my list. As the owner of multiple polos, hoodies, Q-zips, and shorts, I can tell you the quality, fit, and feel is unmatched. You've probably seen Roback on Audric Estime, Kyle Hamilton, and Michael Mayer. Or maybe you saw the dozen Notre Dame fans wearing the Shamrock polo at the Central Michigan game last weekend. I can tell you I saw Roback gear in Dublin earlier this year. While the gear hasn't made me quite that athletic as those Notre Dame football players, Roback is my go-to on the golf course, heading to the lake, watching my kids' sports, or just walking the dog. So make sure you're comfortable throughout the season with Roback. Use code IRISH for 20% off your first purchase. That's code IRISH for 20% off all hoodies, polos, Q-zips, and more.
Hey, Pete, I hear College Game Day is coming to South Bend this weekend. Sounds like a great time to gear up on home field apparel for the cameras.
No doubt, it's the best Notre Dame gear that's straight from the archives at a place with a long history. My favorite hoodie, the Our Lady of Victory sweatshirt that they sent from last week. My wife did not steal it. It was actually my daughter. So if you're looking for gear that both you like and that your family will steal from you, Home Field Apparel, it's the place to look.
Couldn't agree more. And the good news for listeners of this show is that first-time customers get 10% off their first order of Notre Dame gear at homefieldapparel.com when they type in the code Independent23. That's code Independent23 for 10% off first-time customers for Notre Dame gear at homefieldapparel.com.
Matt, what have you always said is my biggest weakness on fall Saturdays?
Well, Pete, I'd say your hair, but who am I to talk? Let's go with your wardrobe.
Harsh but fair.
As a friend and your co-host, let me tell you about the exclusive clothier of Notre Dame football, ESQ. ESQ outfits over 400 professional athletes, celebrities, and Irish players on game day, with bespoke clothing that elevates their game off the field. ESQ sculpts every garment with precision, helping you look your best for work, weddings, celebrations, or in your case, Pete, the press box.
Listeners of The Independent can get 15% off their first online order by using the code IND15 at checkout. That's IND15, or visit them at their Chicago showroom for a full custom look. Head to esqclothing.com to create your perfect fit.
We're now pleased to be joined by Joshua Perry. You know him from NBC Sports. He's also a legendary national championship winning Ohio State player who's got his own bobblehead that's somewhere in the bowels of the United Center by the stadium studio. That looks nothing like him, I will add. Yeah. Joshua, thanks for joining us. Look forward to seeing you Saturday. How's it going with NBC so far with the new gig?
It's been a ton of fun. I think it's been awesome to be able to add a different element in terms of the broadcast for Big Ten football. And now all the programs are visible in different time slots, which is great. I love our approach at NBC of being on campus as well. I think it's a lot of fun. And so it's been really good. And as we move forward and specifically into this week where we have a huge matchup, that's really thanks to Notre Dame and not the Big Ten package there. And also down the line, I think the games are going to continue to get better. We're going to continue to have more fun with this. So I'm super excited.
Yeah, last year, how did you sort of take in Notre Dame, Ohio State when it was in Columbus? And then just sort of what's your process sort of ramping up for this one? Figuring out everything you need to know for Saturday night.
Yeah, so I was in Lincoln, Nebraska at Courtyard Marriott after calling a Nebraska game last year, watching Ohio State and Notre Dame play in the Horseshoe. And the production team was like, hey, do you guys want to get together and watch this game? I'm like, hell no, I'm not getting together with anybody. I'm like, I'm going to be in full fan mode. I'm like, I don't have to be working right now. Like, no, and you guys can't see me when I get into full fan mode because I'm a nut job. This year, obviously very different, a lot more professional because we're going to be on air before and at halftime. But my process is generally the same as it usually is throughout the week. I'll watch a ton of tape. And I'll get on the coaches' calls that they do with the team that's up in the booth, and I'm glad that they give us the opportunity to do that. But to listen in to the coaches and the players and to hear what they have to say. And these are two coaching staffs where, I'm familiar with some of the guys as well. And so anything that I can do just to reach out during the week, I'll try to do as well. But yeah, definitely glad that this is one of the games that we get to be at this year because I've never seen a game in South Bend. And so I'm super excited just to take in that part of the atmosphere as well.
Yeah, I imagine my words, not yours. They'll be a little more exciting than Charlotte, Maryland, or Syracuse, Purdue that you had the last couple of weeks.
Your words, not mine.
You obviously know a lot of people on this Irish staff because most of them were at Ohio State at one point or another. Just how many of these guys are you close with? And did you ever actually cross paths with Marcus Freeman in Columbus when you first started there as a player?
So Marcus Freeman was a graduate assistant when I was a high school recruit. That's when I first got to know him, and he was super sharp back then. Really understood the importance of relationships, all that. And we had stayed in touch from that point on. So certainly glad to have that relationship with him. It's been a pleasure to be able to cover him as he's started to really blow up as one of the most prominent coaches in the country. Probably the second strongest connection I would have on that staff is Al Washington, and I got to know him during his time in Columbus. Again, somebody who I think is just a great guy. Maybe got a little bit of a bad rap there in Columbus for some of the poor defenses that he was a part of. He's a wonderful coach, and I think his group looks really good this year. One guy who was literally my guy and now is gone and is with the Colts was Brian Mason, the special teams coach. And I know everybody was excited about him a year ago with the punt block units and what he was able to do, changing the game like that. So sad that he's not there and I can't harass him this week. But ultimately, Coach Freeman is somebody who I think he gets it because he's on the younger side. And the guys that he put around himself, I'm very impressed with the staff he put together.
What is you sort of get into this early part of the week, getting into tape, Ohio State personnel, as an analyst, as a fan. And I feel like last year's game, covering it in Columbus and being there, it felt like Notre Dame was sort of hanging on for dear life from the second the game started, and that they did a nice job of it. Third quarter, feels like a game, but you felt like Ohio State's going to pull away at some point, and they did. Do you get a different vibe this year that this feels like a game between two teams that can go at it, opposed to last year where it was Ohio State had so many advantages before the ball even was kicked?
Yes, and I was doing a study today. I'm going to read you the longest play from Notre Dame touchdown drives this year. So 75 yards on one of them. You had a 76-yarder, 39, 80 yards, 65 yards, 40, 35, 36, 50, 27, 23, 22, 19, 35, 20, 20, 25. First off, a lot of scoring. Second off, a lot of explosive plays. These are big plays, and it's a mix of run and pass. And I don't think that they had that gear last year, right? They didn't have a quarterback who could spin it like that, quite frankly. And I think that they still need an extra gear in terms of the catch and run ability out of the wide receivers, but their ability to scheme guys open, I think, is as good as anybody right now. And the fact that they can continue to roll bodies throughout the game because they have built some depth up at the skill positions allows those guys to play fresh later in games. So I think from that standpoint, Notre Dame presents a different challenge they did a year ago. I would also say against, not great competition for Ohio State, their secondary has looked like really good. And those guys they're sticky back there. They've gotten their hands on the football, which is something they really didn't do last year. I think Notre Dame, though, from an identity standpoint, the way that they like to fly around on defense and the physicality that they play with, I think they got to bring that particularly to the front, because Ohio State's offensive line is still developing. There's still new guys who haven't played a ton of football. And I think that could be a big swing in this game. So as I start to look at it, Notre Dame is just a different offensive challenge. And I think that the mentality of having a defensive coach that's going to want to get it started up front, get after Ohio State that way, I think it gives them a way better shot than kind of feeling like they just have to hold on for a game.
Quarterback's not everything, but it does feel that way sometimes. And I think certainly the narrative around both these programs has changed based off where they are at that position compared to last year. I don't want to frame it as what's wrong with Ohio State. They're undefeated. They're favored going into this game, but there certainly seems to be there's no longer an air of invincibility about them, at least this early in the season. Again, part of that is not having CJ Stroud back there anymore. What do you see when you turn on the film with Ohio State this year that looks different from last year, and how did they get better at that?
Just doesn't look as comfortable, right? Like the guy back there doesn't look like he's super comfortable being back there. And I think that's to be expected with a young quarterback. Like he's going to have to find his way through this thing. And I think the advantage that Ohio State has is any offense where you can just say, hey, I'm going to give the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr. and see how this works out. It's a solid offense. Travion Henderson being a more explosive runner than he was a year ago when he was banged up. I think it becomes a better offense. So the quarterback narrative, I think for a lot of people, they wanted it to feel like what it felt like with CJ, and CJ was a year older coming into last year, and it was just never going to happen that way. I think it was always going to be a work in progress. Flip side for Notre Dame, I mean, I don't know if that could have been the biggest impact transfer in college football this year, was getting Sam Hartman. And he does everything well. He's super smart. He's very poised. He doesn't need a ton of space to throw. We call it throwing out of a well. But the guy, like the pocket will be converging and collapsing in on him, and he's just like, I'm just going to get this ball out here like it's nothing. And I'm like, dude, how? How does that happen? And he hits every level of the football field, short, intermediate, deep. He's really good. And so the narratives, I think, have changed. And I think that Notre Dame has a built-in advantage of having a guy who's played football in college, it seems like forever. But the reality of it as well for Ohio State is Common Core stats, they're really not bad. Like people are acting like he's, 50% passer. It's just not the case for him. And he's going to have to continue to grow, and this is going to be the next step forward for him.
One part of last year's game that I was interested in your take on, because I think I totally misread this going into it, was Ohio State's offensive line. They were a lot better in that game last year. I thought Isaiah Foskey was going to get after it, and they were going to actually put some pressure on Stroud. They really didn't. But they lost some dudes up front. And you said it's sort of, rebuilding. They're kind of getting their feet to, like, have you got much of a read on that group through 3 games? Is there something to learn about that position?
Well, first off, I'd like to say I think nationally there's an epidemic with offensive line play. And I don't know if it's transfer portal or whatever the case is. I don't see a lot of cohesive units. I look at Alabama as probably the best example of that right now, where they have potentially the most talented, just raw talent offensive line in America. And they have to simplify the blocking schemes for those guys so they can go out there and execute. And the thing that I will say about Ohio State's offensive line is, regardless of how much inexperience there is there, they coach them like they want them to be NFL players. There's no dumbing it down. They're just going to have to get better. There's a huge difference. Like Josh Simmons coming in from San Diego State. Mm-hmm. I think that he is a player that could be very good. He ain't there right now. he shows flashes, but he's very inconsistent in the run game. I think he's shown a lot of flashes in his ability to pass protect, but he also doesn't trust himself or his technique right now. I mean, going up against a team like Notre Dame, I mean, you just better go in on blind faith. You got to trust everything in a game like that, or else it's not going to get the job done. And so that's what I would say there. Like, there's certainly a difference. It is not the same veteran nature of an offensive line that they had last year. But the thing that gives me confidence to say that they will be better down the line is the way that they coach them. They're not putting training wheels on the guys. They're trying to get them right by teaching them the right things.
Joshua, what's the tenor? And I know you're not physically in Columbus anymore, but what's the tenor around Buckeye Nation when it comes to Ryan Day? And I asked that, and I wrote this today on the Inside Zone. The guy has the second best winning percentage in college football behind Kirby Smart since he took over. And yet you lose to Michigan 2 years in a row. This year, arguably your three biggest games are on the road. It's at Notre Dame, coached by an Ohio State alum, at Wisconsin, coached by an Ohio State alum, and then Michigan, which speaks for itself. Is there almost an unspoken pressure on him? Again, I don't think anyone would ever say he's on the hot seat, but what's kind of the Ohio State Nation impression and kind of edict on him this year? Because it feels like this is one of several referendum games for him this year.
Oh, I mean, ton of pressure, right? Like, I think there's as much pressure as he's probably ever been under in his career. And I don't necessarily think it's fair. And it's for two reasons. Number one is the reason that you said, right? Like, you actually look at the success and look at what he's done over the course of his coaching career. And it's like, you know, he's been to the college football playoff 3 times. He coached in a national championship game, won a Rose Bowl. And it's like, my goodness. But it's like, oh, yeah, but they lost to Michigan a couple of times. It's like, guys, grow up. So I think it starts there. The other question that I asked, though, and this is why it's unfair as well, is everybody wants to fire a guy. Everybody, oh, fire the coach, fire the coach. He's not the right guy. Who are you going to get? Because you're not making any suggestions about who.
Notre Dame fans don't want to hear what your suggestion might be.
I mean, and people would try to do it. I would legitimately ask the question, would he actually make the move? Because I think Marcus loves where he's at right now, right? Yeah. Like, that's the reality of the situation. Luke Fickell, you mentioned him. He's at Wisconsin. I'm pretty sure he's enjoying it over there. Would either one of these guys like to be at their alma mater at some point? I think so, but it feels like there'd be a lot of unfinished business for either one of them if they just got up and left when they would be expected to. There's not a clear-cut answer on who you go to get if you want to make the move off of Ryan Day. So to answer it, ton of pressure. I think it went from maybe whispers to a bit of a roar after they beat Indiana on the road in game 1 by 20 points, but it wasn't the right 20 points, because I'm sure if the offense would have put up somewhere in the 40s or 50s, but they would have gave up 20-something or 30-something, people would have felt fine about that. But since it was a low-scoring game and the defense ended up being the side of the ball that played well, everybody's like, oh, my God, the team is terrible. Perspective is big, and fans are funny, and I love them, but I think we got to really just, like, we got to take a step back here.
Well, let's get back into the analyst mode here. If Notre Dame wins on Saturday, like, what happened? Like, what's the – because I think if we asked this question last year, it would have been like C.J. Stroud turned an ankle in warmups and Notre Dame blocked 4 punts. Then maybe Notre Dame would have won the game. But for this one, it's, you know, the path is much wider. But, like, what do you think would have to happen for Notre Dame to get this one?
So I think it's two things. And I read you all the explosive plays that Notre Dame has had on touchdown scoring drives. Outside of that, if they're not explosive offensively, there haven't been a ton of long, methodical drives where they haven't had at least one explosive play. So I think defensively, if Ohio State's defense looked like it did against Penn State and then Maryland toward the end of the year, Michigan and Georgia like last year, that's a loss right there, 100%. The other thing is, and it goes into the same vein, Notre Dame, when they've gotten the ball back on short fields, has done a great job of capitalizing on it, right? So if you're Kyle McCord, you can't give the football away. So it kind of feels like very, you know, coach speak, kind of generic answers is don't give up the explosive play and don't turn the football over. But when you actually dig into the drive charts and the way that this thing has looked, a big part of it is you have to make Notre Dame earn it. And I think they can, but I don't know if that's how they want to play it right now. And you should never give a veteran, really good quarterback too many cracks at it. Don't give them the ball.
Joshua, on the subject of coaching, you underwent a coaching change, I think, during your recruitment, right? You were recruited either by Tressel or Fickell. You end up playing for Urban Meyer. I know it wasn't all roses for you or for anyone there that first year, despite going undefeated. What's on the subject of Notre Dame and Ohio State coaches? What's your best Urban Meyer story, and what was like just as a player to commit to a program that at the time was under 500, go undefeated your first year, and ultimately win a national championship?
Yeah, I'll start with the second part first. I had there was no question in my mind that Ohio State was going to be destined back to greatness. I felt like it was an aberration of a year, and the roster was still in a pretty good spot. It was always the Ohio State University. I felt comfortable coming in. It was also very strange for me because I was coming in to play for a guy that had not recruited me and then told me 5 days into my tenure when I was 17 years old as an early enrollee in the dead winter of Columbus, Ohio, that I could not play at Ohio State and I should have went somewhere else. So that's how we got started off, really lit a fire under my behind to get right, and ultimately ended up doing that. Urban Meyer, I don't know if I have a great story that I'm willing to tell in this setting, but I will explain to you how the mind of Urban works. Is we know those people that are very hyperbolic, where everything is the greatest that's ever happened or it's the worst thing that you've ever seen. And I think Urban's psychology was to utilize hyperbole as much as possible. And it would be something as simple as Devin Smith, who was one of our wide receivers, ended up being like a second-round pick to the Jets. He was a gunner on our punt coverage team. And Devin was fast. He was a track athlete at Ohio State as well. He was fast. He would run down the football field, force a fair catch about like 98% of the time. And Urban would talk about his releases. And he would say, that's the best release that I've ever seen in my coaching career. Nobody does a release better than Devin Smith. We'd watch the whole tape of releases, and I promise you it was about 6 or 7 guys who had better releases. But Urban wasn't necessarily talking about that. It was the effort in which Devin played and the fact that he was a starting wide receiver who was on special teams. I think he was trying to use that to kind of build the psychology of what our team was. So it was never really about the thing that Urban was talking about. It was always about the thing he was trying to get you to do.
Just refresh my memory real quick. Did Notre Dame recruit you at all? Did you visit?
I had some conversations. I like the other smart kids school out there on the West Coast in Stanford. That was my I like to tell people that was my backup school in case the whole staying at home in Columbus thing didn't work out for me.
Yeah, you could have you'd have some good Jim Harbaugh stories at that point. I'm interested, last thing for me, like how Marcus Freeman is perceived by Ohio State right now. You know, he gets here. I think he said some stuff that probably wishes he had phrased differently or not said at all. But he definitely has sort of like a high Q rating, sharp, like bright guy, great recruiter, you know, a really good sort of face of the program. How has Ohio State sort of like chilled out about the stuff that came out like right when he started, and how is he sort of viewed in Columbus these days?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have forgotten or forgiven or whatever they've done. I think there's always going to be an affinity for Marcus. He was a great player at Ohio State. He's also an upstanding citizen. He's a hard guy to dislike, right? Like, you know, he's well-dressed, good-looking dude. He's got the best barber in the Midwest. I mean, every time I see him, he looks like he just got out of the barber chair.
Yeah, shout out for Julio as barber.
But just everything about him says like, all right, you know, this is a guy who I certainly can respect, even if he's not the head coach of my squad. And to, again, stir up some of the Notre Dame people, I think if there was ever an opportunity that he could coach in Columbus, a lot of people would be on board for that. So I think it's a little bit of we hate him because he's at the other spot, but we don't hate him because we love Marcus.
We'll get you out of here on this. What's a weekend like for you with this new gig? Obviously, a little bit of easier travel one driving to South Bend from Chicago, but you know, you get in Friday, you tour campus, and again, you know, first game day experience in Notre Dame. What are you most looking forward to here? Yeah,
so typical schedule. I leave Chicago Thursday nights, and I'll travel into wherever we are doing our game. Friday, we will typically have a production meeting in the morning, and then we'll go and meet with the coaches, the home team coaches. We'll zip around campus. If there's any sightseeing that we need to do, we'll do that. We'll have a second production meeting on Friday evening, and then we're free to kind of do our thing. So that usually involves dinner and a couple of cocktails with the crew. And then Saturdays are the work days. So it depends on how many games we have. But if we've got a noon game on Peacock, we won't do a pregame for that, but we'll do a halftime, and then we'll do a pregame leading into whatever's coming on at 3:30. We'll do a halftime, and then we'll do a pregame again leading into the 7:30 game halftime. And if we got to fill after the game, we do that. And then I do a podcast with Ahmed Fareed and Matt Castle after all of the games called Go Big or Go Home. And that, I don't know if it was the greatest idea that we've ever had to do a podcast at like midnight, but we still do a podcast at midnight. So they're long days, but they're super fun days. I tell people all the time, like, you know, I love talking college ball, and somebody puts like, you know, a direct deposit in my bank account. Like I'm good. I'm good to go. It's awesome.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you joining us, Josh. We look forward to seeing you on Saturday, and enjoy the weekend. It should be a fun one, an extra special one for you on both sides.
I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Hartman in the shotgun. Estime to his right. Here we go. Give to Estime up the middle. Keeps his feet. 10, 5, far side. Touchdown, Irish. Sprinted through a hole on the left side. Avoided a low tackle attempt. Gathered himself and then ran by himself to the end zone from 17 yards. Down to 9 on the 24. Ball remains on the left hash. Hartman is 3 out of 5 so far. Drops back, stands in a nice pocket, throws one deep down the middle of the field. Chris Tyree is there, got it. 30, 20, 10, touchdown Notre Dame.
Oh my goodness.
Sam Hartman hits a streaking Chris Tyree in stride down the middle of the field for a 76-yard score.
That was Josh Perry of NBC. Thanks for joining the Independent, and yeah, some great insight. Hopefully, if we run into him on Saturday, he will tell us the real Urban Meyer story that he wasn't going to tell us.
I may have heard a few of them and teed him up with that in mind. It didn't go as planned, but he's told that one several times. Like, it was basically Deion Sanders bringing my Louis before that was a thing. Like, before Cam was around, like, Urban gets there and basically says, you all suck. And I've heard Josh say he would still do that through the season. And Luke Fickell would go in the room after and be like, don't listen to him. Like, you guys are here. Go out there and make plays. Like, the psychology, if you want to be nice about it, knows no ends there.
Psychological terrorism.
Yeah. It's also why in the era of NIL and NFL, as we saw with him, probably not going to be coaching again anytime soon.
No, definitely not. But I thought that the insight on Ohio State's offensive line, that's a spot where they took a grad transfer, like Notre Dame at quarterback. You're not taking grad transfers to round up a position of strength. You're taking them because you're hurting at that spot. And, if Ohio State is down on the offensive line, then, Notre Dame's pass rush, Marcus Freeman talked about it on Monday. Like, he doesn't want to hear about sacks, and Notre Dame doesn't have a ton of them because he feels like Notre Dame gets enough pressure. And it's a big part of the reason why they rank first nationally in pass efficiency defense. The best way to defend Harrison and Abuka is to make sure Kyle McCord can't sit back there and know what the heck he's looking at and have time to get the ball where he wants it to go. So I think that Ohio State has some weaknesses that, it's like, are they a finesse team? I don't know is that fair to say?
I mean, historically, that's been the label put on them. And going into last year, they worked, they fired their offensive line coach. They fired their defense coordinator. They worked really hard to shed those labels. And, reasonable minds could debate about whether they've fully overcome that kind of perception or not. The Michigan game would tell you they haven't. Mm-hmm. But it's a team that can usually score its way out of problems. I mean, I think back to like the Penn State game last year where they were down for much of it. And I think they put up something like 28 or 35 points in the fourth quarter. Like, it was absurd the way they just turned it on against a team that ended up winning the Rose Bowl last year. I mean, they had arguably the best receiver in the country entering last year in Jackson Smith-Njigba, who had 300-something yards in the Rose Bowl the year before. He gets knocked out by Brandon Joseph pretty much for the season early on in that game. Yeah. And, oh, by the way, there's Marvin Harrison Jr., who's now the best probably football player in the country. A little bit different when you don't have C.J. Stroud throwing you the ball. but no less dangerous if you're in Notre Dame secondary, especially when you've got Emeka Egbuka, Kate Stover, the tight end. I mean, a lot of us, and I'm guilty of it on this very show, of referencing Ohio State being a missed field goal away from, beating Georgia and winning the national title for all intents and purposes last year. They went into that final drive of the Georgia game in the Peach Bowl down their top 2 running backs, their top 2 receivers, and their top tight end. Like, you're grading them on a curve whether you know it or not when you say, they couldn't get it done. Like, any other team in the country that's down that personnel against that defense, you're not thinking they're falling forward 3 yards at a time, let alone being in position to kick the game winner there. So they can out-talent and outscore pretty much anyone on a dime, and it makes them incredibly dangerous, even if they haven't exactly shown that beyond last week against Western Kentucky so far. But again, the takeaway for me was them holding Western Kentucky to 10 points, because I think this is a really good defense that's going to present some problems for Notre Dame that Jared Parker has not had to deal with yet. I mean, he's passed every test with flying colors so far, but this is, I guess you'd call it the midterm, but this is the final. Like, this is, if you can do it against these guys, watch out. Like, Notre Dame will be in business this year.
Yeah, that's look how Notre Dame's receivers, when you watch some of the big plays they've made this year, they're not jammed at the line of the scrimmage. They have free releases, and they can just sort of frolic down the field and wait for the ball to get there. Like, that's not happening against Ohio State. Like, it's Central Michigan, and they made their secondary look like a Division II group. That's not happening against Ohio State. I thought that the receivers would get tested a little bit more than they were at North Carolina State, where they were tested. I thought they did a nice job. Any team can bust a coverage the way that NC State did with Chris Tyree, I think just before halftime. Like, that's a possibility. But what you're not going to get is like the Tobias Merriweather touchdown from last week, where the corner doubles down on the tight end, so they're essentially, he falls out of the play. And there were a couple other moments where Sam Hartman didn't hit, where Jaden Thomas was wide open in the end zone because the corner fell down. There was a play where Sam Hartman didn't hit Rico Flores streaking down the middle of the field like Chris Tyree, but there was a pass rusher in his face, so Hartman couldn't deliver the ball. So it's the Ohio State secondary. I don't know. I feel like in some ways, in the last few years, they've probably been known as being more talented individuals than like a cohesive group that played well together. We'll see on Saturday night, because I think Jared Parker, the final exam metaphor is apt, because he's done a nice job so far. The fact that Notre Dame has receivers running all over the place and Sam Hartman could lead them is down to play calling and then the quarterback getting the ball there. But what does it look like on Saturday when maybe there aren't easy options? Like, there's no good answer all of a sudden. You got to create one out of nothing or come up with a new plan on the fly. That's going to be really interesting to watch.
I'm excited about it. You're excited about it. We'll hear from both coordinators on Tuesday. And I'm curious to hear any other insight and intel and nuggets and breadcrumbs that we get throughout the week in the lead up to this game, because the coverage and we'll meet the moment. I mean, you can't overdo it with this game. You just can't. And I'm very excited about seeing what the atmosphere is like. Again, I'm expecting one like we have not seen, that I've not seen before, that you've saw, in person a long, long time ago when Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush came to town. It should be exciting. A reminder for listeners of the show, we are sold out for Thursday for our live show, but we will be part of a networking event for between 5:30 and 6:30 Central Time with food and refreshments. That's $20. That's at ESQ, our proud sponsor. That's located at 180 North LaSalle Street in downtown Chicago. You can check out the Notre Dame Club of Chicago for more details there, and for the opportunity to purchase tickets as well. You can tell Pete and I how you really feel about us, our takes, our looks, our new show, whatever else is on your mind. And maybe we'll talk a little bit of football while we're at it as well. But I know I'm looking forward to mingling with all you guys out there and girls out there. And I always appreciate all the feedback we've gotten, especially with this new show so far. This did not know we had an audience on YouTube with the way we both look, but apparently we do. So let's keep it coming. A reminder, you can download and subscribe at Apple Spotify, Google, or wherever else you get your favorite podcast. Please leave a nice review and comment if you're so inclined as well. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys. I'm looking forward to seeing the game on Saturday. Pete, anything you want to add?
No, that's it. We'll be podcasting again in 72 hours. It's the 3-podcast week. It feels like we're covering a coaching change or something.
I don't know if this is the bonus episode or if Thursday's a bonus episode. I guess if you're paying for Thursday to be there, that counts as a bonus. But we'll have our predictions that podcast as well, the way we usually do later in the week. But that's all from us here on Monday. He's Pete. I'm Matt. Thank you as always for listening to The Independent.